Hey everyone, it's Ryan with Spiceworks. Thanks so much for hanging out with us with another Spiceworks partner webinar. Today it's brought to you by PhD Virtual, Virtualization Backup and Recovery Deep Dive. A few things I hope everyone checks out. First is the question box on your screen. Please submit questions. I know our presenters are excited to converse with you. Also, if your questions aren't answered, PhD will have the chance to follow up with you, and the Q&A will take place at the end. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so if you have to step out, it's no big deal. You will get a link to that recording in about a week. And one of the cooler things to mention is we are giving away a $50 Amazon gift card thanks to PhD Virtual. One attendee will get it, and that will be announced at the end of the Q&A, so stick around. Now I'll introduce our presenters. We have Robert Payne, Product Marketer for PhD Virtual, and Greg Pataki, Sales Engineer for PhD Virtual. Robert's going to start us off, so whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks for everyone for joining us today this afternoon. The topic of today's webinar is a deep dive into virtualization backup and recovery. And what we wanted to do with this presentation was just take a look at a lot of the concepts, buzzwords, features, functionality that you hear when you're talking about data protection and backup in a virtualized world, but might not necessarily know how they all interrelate and why they're important. So that's going to be the topic of today's webcast. We're going to go through some slides. Towards the end, we're going to have a demo presented by Greg. It will be a PhD Virtual Backup, as well as Unitrends Enterprise Backup and Reliable DR. And then lastly, we will have, as Ryan said, the Q&A at the end. So thanks again to everyone for joining us today. We'll take a look at the agenda. We thought it first made sense to start off with just a slide on who PhD Virtual and Unitrends is. And if you're not familiar, PhD Virtual was acquired by Unitrends late last year in the middle of December 2013. We're very excited about that, and that's why you can see we're PhD Virtual, but we're also Unitrends now. So we have just one slide on that, I promise. Then we'll kind of dive into the topic of today's webcast. We thought it first made sense to take a look at the overview of what a typical IT environment looks like in today's world, and then we'll talk about those buzzwords and concepts that we mentioned, such as agent and agentless backup, deduplication, etc. We'll conclude with the demo and then the Q&A. So Unitrends and PhD Virtual, now a combined company. We are a fast-growing company, and that's kind of a testament to how fast-growing the high-tech industry is and remains to this day, which is great. You can see our growth there on the right-hand side. Back in 2009 is when things really started to take off for both of our companies. Unitrends is a 10-year-old company, and PhD Virtual has been around since 2006. So we've seen some very strong combined growth. And again, that's a testament to how strong the market is and how much of a need there are for the types of products that we manufacture. We do have 10,000 customers worldwide and 350 employees across the combined companies. Many of our customers range from the small shops that have 1 and 2 host-type environments to enterprise customers that have locations across the world and several co-location facilities, etc. The technology that we provide is very scalable and it's very cost-effective, so it is able to fit into all different types of environments. We have 5 offices in the U.S. and EMEA. Our headquarters officially now is in Columbia, South Carolina. The PhD headquarters is in Philadelphia, PA, where it's kind of dreary and raining, and we're kind of hoping that spring finally shows up one of these days, but not here yet. All right, so today's IT environment, and you can take a look here. On the right-hand side, we have the latest Magic Quadrant from Gartner for x86 server virtualization. Basically, what we find when we both obviously do research on our own here, but when we speak with customers and prospects, is that there's still a mix of different types of assets in every environment. So obviously, virtualization is here to stay, and it does have a strong hold. The latest data from Gartner says that about roughly 2/3 of x86 workloads are virtualized. And then the remaining components are made up of both physical assets and then cloud infrastructure. So physical, while it is going away and decreasing, it's still very widespread. There's still applications and workloads out there that simply cannot go virtual at this point, so they're going to be remaining physical, and they're therefore a requirement and a priority for our customers to protect. And then cloud. By any measure that you look at, by any study that comes out, you'd see that both public and private cloud computing is on the rise, And so therefore that's also a consideration when you're talking about how that data is being protected, how it's being recovered in an outage situation, and so on and so forth. And Greg, you have the opportunity to speak with customers and prospects every day. Does this kind of align with the types of setups you see in those environments?
Yeah, definitely. I see a lot of people moving mostly towards virtualization just because you're able to scale very well. And yes, there are some physical servers still left around, a lot of workstations, but generally people are consolidating their physical servers into a virtual environment. It's just much easier to manage, maintain.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, this was a new addition for the Magic Quadrant, and this is as of June 2013, so coming up on a year old, but this is the latest quadrant that was produced by Gartner. You can see that they did put Microsoft in the leaders category for Hyper-V. So you have VMware and Microsoft as a leader, you have Citrix there following, and then you have some other outliers there. So that's going to bring us to our first poll question of the day. We'll see if the people comprising this webinar are reflective of what we're seeing in the industry as a whole. If everybody wants to participate in the poll, basically we're asking how many hypervisors are you using in your environment today? 1, 2, 3, or more than 3? And when I say using, I'm really just curious as to if you have an instance of it. So many folks we encounter have one that they use mainly for production, but then they've implemented another one of the lesser known ones for lab purposes, because for various reasons, they don't necessarily want to pay licensing if it's just going to be a lab or a testing environment, et cetera. But if you have an instance of it, we'd like to know about it and just kind of see if our data lines up. So take a minute, go ahead and select which option applies to you and hit submit, and then we'll take a look at the results. Okay, so about half of our audience, this is interesting, about half of our audience has one hypervisor deployed. Then we have, say, a third of it with 2, and then once we get above that, not too many. So this is an interesting. So we still have about half of our audience that's mainly using one hypervisor. I want to thank everybody for participating in that poll. The next topic we want to cover is agent and agentless backup. We'll start with agentless, or as it's called, image-based backup. It's pretty much the generally accepted best practice for virtual data protection and recovery. It allows you to protect the entire VM image and as well as restore it instantly. In most cases, you can also granularly recover files and application objects from an image-based backup. And it's easy to manage. It puts less pressure on the hypervisor because it's aware of the virtualization layer. But there are instances where deploying an agent could potentially make sense, and we'll talk a little bit about those now. Agent-based backup, also known as file-based backup, where they make sense. So in a highly transactional database situation, so in some cases, the snapshot process just isn't necessarily sufficient for these types of applications. And a lot of times this is critical data that we're talking about, so it's SQL data, Exchange data, SharePoint data, Oracle data, et cetera. So a lot of times, typically what you'll see folks do is take an image-based backup, but also use an agent method to get a backup that occurs more often throughout the day so that the RPOs will be a lot shorter. If there's a complex virtual disk configuration, so for example in VMware with physical RDMs or independent disks that just cannot be snapshotted and therefore cannot be protected via an image-based solution, you may want to deploy an agent to protect those. For virtual storage capacity shortages, so sometimes there's just simply not enough storage space to take the snapshot. This is prevalent in some hypervisors more so than others, but if there is not enough storage space to take the snapshot, you would need to deploy an agent to back up the data on that virtual machine. And then for P2V and V2P recovery, so the use of agents could allow for migrations between physical and virtual environments because the underlying hardware and virtualization layers are not necessarily leveraged for this process. And lastly, for free ESXi, which is obviously the flavor of hypervisor from VMware. If you're using the free version, it prohibits agentless backup, so you would need to deploy an agent on there as well. I mean, really what it boils down to at the end of the day is a combination of both agents as well as agentless methods can work best. And Greg, we're just kind of getting up and running with the UEB product, which is Unitrends Enterprise Backup. And that provides a combination of agentless and agent-based backup. And how have customers been receiving that when we show it to them, when we work with them, and things like that?
Very well, because a lot of our clients, even though they are mostly virtual, you can still utilize an agent in a completely virtual environment. Obviously the physical servers, they get an agent on them and you can back them up with the same interface. But virtual environment, there are use cases where you want to put an agent on a virtual machine, and let's say a SQL server, and you want to back up that virtual machine at the virtual machine level, so for fast restores, but you want that granularity of a SQL backup where you can back up specific databases more frequently throughout the day and actually do an application level restore directly back into SQL. So they have been receiving it very well, and they like that flexibility.
And in a former life, Greg, you were actually a systems administrator yourself, so an end user. Did you use a combination of agent and agentless, or were you mostly centered on one or the other?
I typically use the agentless type backup. There were instances where you wanted to do more CDP type backups where you need a constant or a very frequent mode of backup where you're grabbing files almost every minute or less. And agents are useful for that, but I've worked, I'd say, with early on with agent type backups because that was the norm, and then migrated to agentless in more recent years.
There was a time when there were only agents to back up, right? Cool. So moving on, another buzzword or concept that you'll hear in this arena is deduplication. It's pretty much par for the course at this point for virtual backup and recovery solutions. Any vendor out there that doesn't have it is in trouble. But the ability, it's essentially the ability to compress data and utilize APIs such as the change block tracking API to eliminate redundant data and only save and send new data to the backup target. And the advantages here is it's obviously going to, number one, lower your storage cost because you're not going to spend money on storage, storing data that you necessarily don't need to store because it's been duplicated. It's also going to increase the speed at which your backups process, which will shorten your backup window. That's still to this day one of the main reasons that people switch out backup solutions is that they're unable to meet their backup window. Backup windows are stretching into production times during the day. They're not able to complete overnight or on the weekend. And that impacts the system as a whole because it's drawing resources to conduct these backups, which therefore impacts business operations. So it used to be more prevalent, but still to this day, people come to us and say, I'm not meeting my backup window, and this is one of the areas where typically our software anyway tends to help. And it also allows for more robust retention options because you can keep more amounts of data for longer periods of time because you're efficiently storing only the data that is net new and that needs to be kept to restore a full backup. So the next slide is going to talk a little bit and show a little bit about how the deduplication engine in PhD Virtual Backup works, and I'm going to let Greg present that.
Thank you. So with our PhD True Dedupe technology, we are actually deduping the data at the source side before we actually send it to the backup media. So we read the data, look to see if there's any duplicate blocks, and we don't have to write those duplicate blocks. We don't do a background type deduplication. So we're saving on the time, and if the data is being written across the network, we're saving on network bandwidth to send the data to the storage in a dedupe format already. So customers regularly see around 25 to 1 dedupe ratios, reduces the backup storage requirements by 96%, and like I said, reduces the network impact for the transfer, so it gives you very fast, efficient type backups.
Yeah, and you can see here that our methodology is source side data dedupe. There is a target side as well. Can you walk us through what that entails?
Well, that will write data to the storage in native form, and then there's a background process that will analyze all of the blocks to see if there are any duplications. Typically, the data will get written to a landing area where it's kept there for a short period of time, and mainly that's for fast restores, fast access, because typically 85% or so of data that gets restored is new data or just recent data. So sits in a landing state for a while, and then it gets moved off into the dedupe storage. So there are advantages to that as well. So it just depends on the use case for each one.
Right, more than one way to skin a cat to a certain extent. So we here use source side. It does allow us to minimize impact on the network that's transferring the data. But as Greg just kind of outlined, there are some advantages to target side deduplication as well. So it's really, much like anything else, kind of determining what your particular needs are going to be, and then making the best choice for you. Moving on, we're going to talk here about backup mode. So all backup storage is not created equal. That's a nice title for a blog post or a headline or something like that. But what we're talking about here is it really makes sense to take into account what type of backup storage that you either have or that you're going to be acquiring when you're designing your overall backup storage strategy. There's several different types. You can have a network target. You can attach a virtual disk if you're backing up to a dedupe device or tape or to the cloud. There's many different ways to, many different types of equipment that you'll be backing up to. So it really is prudent to kind of determine what are the specific capabilities of the equipment that you have, and then how's that going to impact how the backup software, the backup product, writes data to it. So ideally, your software is flexible enough to be used optimally, regardless of this, but not every product is. So some key factors that you want to pay attention to when you're designing this is ease of management in terms of setting the system up and on a day-to-day basis, having to check everything to make sure it's working correctly. Speed, obviously, is an important one, going back to the whole idea of completing your backup window in the time that you need to. Storage efficiency, retention options, again, we just kind of spoke on those as well. And RPO considerations is another important one, is how far back you'll need to restore data, or what is your acceptable level of data loss. The next slide is going to show the two methodologies that PhD Virtual Backup has in place, and Greg's going to walk through those.
So basically, with the different types of backup modes, we have our full and incremental backup mode, and then we have our virtual full type of backup mode. So with full and incremental, what it's going to do is write a full backup on a frequency that you specify. So typically once a week, on the weekends, you're going to run your fulls because you have more time away from the production business. And in between those full backups, you're going to run incrementals. And this is ideal for writing out to network-based file systems because you're going to write larger files, less of them, and it's optimized for a network-based file system. The other method is the virtual full. Now this will run a full backup the very first time, and then after that you never have to run another full. It'll just run incrementals forever. And the ideal target for these are attached virtual disks, because this would be writing to a disk-based file system. It's optimized for that type of storage. It's writing very small, many files to the storage. You get a better dedupe ratio and more efficient backups and restores from that type of storage.
Cool. So it sounds like if you are in the situation where you're attaching virtual disks, then your virtual full methodology with the PhD software would be your best fit. But if you're writing to a network target or to a deduping device or tape, etc., your fuller incrementals might be your best choice.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Cool. So we're going to move a little bit to the recovery and disaster recovery side of the equation at this point and talk a little bit about replication. Backup and replication tend to go hand in hand a lot these days. Obviously, two separate functions, but both having their place and having their needs in every type of environment. There's several different types of replication that you'll want to be aware of. Data versus VM replication, software versus hardware or array-based replication, as they call it. Trying to determine which is right for you. I think it really boils down to what your SLAs are. And some folks have more stringent SLAs than others. Some folks have SLAs that are actually written down and communicated. Others, mainly in smaller businesses, they're more just verbal, kind of how fast can we come back type of SLAs. But whatever they are, you'll really want to figure out what you're on the hook for if you do find yourself in an outage situation, and then start thinking about your recovery options from there, and replication could be certainly one of them. But some things to consider if you're just looking for an offsite copy of data. You might not need to come back online, but you might need to access your data at some point at an offsite location if something were to happen to the primary site. Or do you need a site to which to fail over to in the event of a DR outage? So is uptime the most important factor for you? And then if it is, how quickly do you need to come back online in the event of an outage? Greg, what are the thoughts really in the marketplace when you talk to customers and prospects about how they're kind of planning for these types of outages? Because we've seen them over the past few years with hurricanes and other types of events that downtime is a very real situation that people face. How do you see people planning for them?
That's a good question, because typically, obviously everybody is different. I've come to different clients where they say downtime can only be in the minutes or hours. And then I have other clients that say, oh, well, a day or two is fine. So obviously, the more frequent or the quicker that you need to be up, it's going to cost more for that type of solution. So it's kind of a balance that way. But typically, on average, I see people that need to be up within a day at least. So they plan for the replication frequency, the backup frequency, that will give them an RPO of 1 day. 1 day's worth of data loss is acceptable on average. But then you get your clients that have a lot of critical data that gets changed more frequently, and they need RPOs down to every 30 minutes. And you have to plan for that as well. Increase your replication intervals. You need to have fast enough hardware so that the machines can boot up very fast. And so it is definitely related to the industry and to the client. But I would say on average it's 1 day.
So that's an awesome benchmark to use there. So 1 day, for the most part, people need to come back online, or bad things start to happen, right? Business gets impacted. Yeah, that's interesting. I was working with one of our clients the other day. They're a banking institution, actually right here in PA, First Keystone National Bank, and I was talking to that client about their strategy, and he said, uptime is important, and coming back online is obviously important, but data integrity, to him, in his case, was actually the most important piece of the puzzle. And the main reason being they're a financial institution, so they couldn't have, debits or credits happening more than once, because you're talking about people's money, people's financials. So for him, it's really maintaining that data integrity, and if they were to have an outage situation, being able to restore the data and make sure it's valid, as opposed to coming, right back up a line within an hour or two or something like that. So it does vary. Our software, PhD Virtual Backup software, has VM replication. And Greg, can you walk us through what that looks like from an environmental perspective?
Sure. So we have a unique type of replication system. We first will back up the data to a backup storage location with our primary VBAs, we call them, or our backup VBAs. And we back up to that storage, and step number 2 is the replication VBA, which is typically at another site, and it reads that backup data and pulls VMs from that backup data, restores them into VMware, into a host, registers them, and leaves them in a powered-off state. So it's constantly refreshing that VM replica at the secondary site with the refreshed, newest backup data. So typically, we're only accessing the live running virtual machine once during the backup, and then we don't have to access that virtual machine again. We're just pulling from the backup data. So a lot less impact on the live running virtual machines.
And that what you end up with ultimately is what they call a cold standby at the secondary site?
Yeah, I guess that's what you would call it. It is powered off, an exact replica, and if you have a problem at your main site, you can just manually power up that virtual machine at your secondary site, and when it boots up, it's going to be an exact replica of the primary, and you can switch over and use that.
Right. Hopefully, yeah, that's what I tell all of our clients. Hopefully that never has to happen. You never have to go through that process, but you know, it's good to plan. I wanted to tell everybody about a report that I just read the other day, and I think is very valuable in this conversation. It was on the state of global disaster recovery preparedness, and it's from an outfit called drbenchmark.org. The full report is available for free on their site, so you can visit drbenchmark.org at any time and download it. But there were some key findings out there that kind of struck me as interesting. Of the folks that took the survey, which I think they listed, there's between 500 and 750, I believe was the range. 3 out of 4 companies worldwide were failing in terms of disaster readiness. I say failing because the report is based on a survey that they conduct that allows people to anonymously input how they have constructed their DR plan, and then what it does is it benchmarks your answers against everyone else's. Again, it's anonymously, but the net of that was that 3 out of 4 companies were actually failing in terms of being prepared for disaster. More than half have lost critical applications or even an entire data center for hours or even days. 36% have lost 1 or more applications over that time for hours at a time, and then 20% have lost 1 or more critical application for a period of days. So if you think about what that means and what that means to your particular business, typically time is money, especially in this fast-paced digital world. So when internet is down or when systems are down, when people can't access emails, when people can access sales systems, anything across all departments, business does tend to be interrupted, especially in this fast-paced global economy that we live in. So when outages do occur, it is extremely prudent to be prepared for them. And one of the key ways that you can do that, the report stipulates, is building a DR plan for everything that you need to recover. So one of the main reasons for the lack of preparedness was lack of comprehensive DR planning. Obviously, lack of budget, resources, and skills factored into that as well. And some of those things you can't do anything about. If your budget gets denied, or if you only have X number of dollars to spend in an area, then sometimes there's no wiggle room. But they did list some tips on how to improve. And the first one is to obviously think about and build a plan for everything that you need to recover, and not just necessarily thinking about data, although that is important, and it is important to get your data back in a timely manner, but think about, conceptually speaking, what is needed to bring a system back, or to bring an application back, or to facilitate a situation where if site A is down, the company can still conduct business operations with near normal efficiency, if they were to fail over to site B. Defining recovery time objectives as well as recovery point objectives for your critical applications, so understanding what your acceptable level of data loss is and how much time you can afford to be down, which would be your RPO and your RTO. And then testing these critical applications frequently to validate whether or not they will recover within RTOs and RPOs. And that's another area that the report highlights is that many folks obviously have a plan, and many times it's a good plan, it's a robust plan, and it's documented, et cetera. But a lot of times when we ask, well, when's the last time you actually went through a test, we get a lot of blank stares and crickets because a lot of people aren't testing these DR plans on an ongoing basis. And that brings us to our next poll. Curious to see with our audience here today how often you're testing your DR plan. So we'd like to know, when was the last time you've actually tested a full test of your DR plan, within a week, within a month, within 1 year, or if it's just not something that you personally have done before with your organization, you could submit rarely or never. But the net of it is we do feel that there's or based on our data, we've seen that there's a hole here as far as DR planning goes, and that people aren't testing. And a lot of that's because the tests are pretty arduous, and it's actually pretty complicated and convoluted to do a full test of your DR plan. It involves a lot of different people and processes, and it can take some time and some money, so it sometimes can be avoided in a lot of organizations. So that's one of the main reasons the report cites that there is such a lack of testing. So we'll see what this audience has listed here for their, so here we go, rarely or never, close to 60%. So that's kind of what we're seeing, and again, it's for the reasons that we've listed here. I'm actually glad to see that about a quarter of the audience has tested within the last year. I think many organizations are able to get themselves to the point where they can conduct a test within a year, but many times that's not enough because a lot can happen between now and a year from now in terms of how you're going to react to a disaster. So, Greg, what do you see when you have conversations with customers and prospects? How do they react when you talk about actually testing the plan?
Typically, the results are what I see mostly is rarely or never are the tests run. Usually within a year or two, they're running tests. It's very infrequent that I come across any type of prospects that are doing regular tests. And it's very difficult because you have to spend a lot of time setting up the test, and depending on how you are backing up and restoring or replicating your data to another data center, if you actually have one, then it depends on what the methodology you're going to use to do these types of testing. And a lot of people, they just can't do it. And if you're paying for some type of service, it just depends on how often you get your services tested, and the more frequently you want to test, the more expensive it is. So we typically see very infrequently, and I used to work for an MSP for a DR company, and we did backup and disaster recovery for clients, and it depended on what their service agreement was. Some people got a couple tests a year, some people got a test once a year or more frequently, and it was a lot of work to do all of the testing.
Yeah, like anything else, boils down to money, right? If you want it, you typically have to pay for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. All right, well, we just have one more slide here, and then we're going to jump into the demo, which Greg is going to help us out with. I just wanted to kind of map back the PhD Virtual and Unitrends product line to the issues and the areas that we've discussed before. So the combined company does offer universal data protection for virtual physical cloud environments. We are one of the only companies to agentlessly support all three hypervisors, VMware, or all three major hypervisors, VMware, Citrix, as well as Hyper-V. And you're going to see that single pane of glass interface in the demo. However, Unitrends also has their own backup software. They have a Recovery Series appliance, which is hardware, as well as Unitrends Enterprise Backup, which is software. And so you might be thinking, okay, you just showed me 3 different backup products from the same company. How am I supposed to decide? For highly virtualized environments where physical protection really isn't a main requirement, there is obviously probably going to be some physical in the environment, but it's not necessarily a main requirement. You're really looking for a best-of-breed point solution for virtualization. That's when you would select PhD Virtual Backup. If you do have that mixed environment where you have virtual, you have physical, you might have tape as part of your offsite strategy, So if there is a mix, you're going to be looking for Unitrends Enterprise Backup. And if you're looking for an all-in-one solution that comes complete with the backup storage and the hardware, that's when you would choose the Recovery Series appliance. Again, all of these 3 backup products now available as a one-stop shop, so to speak, with the combined PHD Virtual and Unitrends. Disaster recovery orchestration, that's facilitated by Reliable DR, and that's coming from the PHD Virtual side of the house. It provides automated and guaranteed failover and failback as well as DR testing. So if you think about the conversation we just had with testing your DR plan, again, as Greg was saying, a lot of people aren't doing that. We saw that just from the survey we conducted here. Greg mentioned how for those that are, a lot of times it's a service that you have to pay for and it's fairly expensive. What Reliable DR does is it's a piece of software that you can buy from us, and it will automatically and continually test your SLAs. So it'll test RPO, RTO, and then recoverability, and it'll do that on an ongoing basis. So you'll deploy it, you'll instruct it which applications to test, and then on an ongoing basis, it will spin up those applications in a secondary sandbox, and it will test and verify that you would be able to recover according to the SLAs that you've specified on an ongoing basis. And should you miss a test, so should it not be able to recover the service, or should it miss an RTO and an RPO, it will send you a report, and then it'll ping you and it'll say, hey, were you to experience an event outage under this particular scenario, you would not be able to recover according to your SLAs, and then you can go in and take a look and see what's causing the issue. And in the demo, Greg's going to show you an example of one of those types of compliance reports. And then lastly, cloud backup and recovery. Unitrends has their own cloud, which you can back up to, as well as PHD Virtual has the cloud host functionality, which is just a module that's part of PHD Virtual Backup that lets you easily and automatically back up to the cloud. Some people back up directly to it and use it as their main repository. Other folks will back up locally and then send an offsite copy for offsite protection. So that brings us to the end of the PowerPoint slide portion. I'm going to hand it over to Greg now, who's going to demo some software for you.
All right. Thank you, Robert. So what I'd like to do is first show the PHD Virtual Backup, and then I'm going to show the UEB Virtual Appliance, and then I'm going to show Reliable DR. And I'll go through each one of them and look at the different, a high-level overview of all of the main points. So right now, I'm going to present the PHD Virtual Backup. And the beauty of our 3 types of products here is that they're web-based, the web-based interface. So I have Chrome open and I'm connected into each one of our products. So the first tab, I am connected into our PHD Virtual Backup. The next tab is our UEB, and the third is our Reliable DR. So I can manage everything with basically one interface, just different tabs. It's a web-based interface. I don't need 3 different types of consoles that I'm running. So with our PHD Virtual Backup, when you come to the initial dashboard, this gives you a view of how your system, your backup system is running. And when we look up at the top here, we can easily look and see how many errors we have, what is not being protected, which was a big request from a lot of our clients. They want to easily see what virtual machines, what is not being protected in their environment. You can come here and you click on this and it will show you all of the machines that are not being protected, how many are being protected. And it'll give you some general information about the backup speeds. In the main dashboard, it's going to show you information about the backup storage. So I have 2 different environments that I'm backing up, and I'll go through that in a second. But what this is going to do is show you the information about the storage of each one of your VBAs, and these can be in completely different sites, completely different environments, different hypervisors, all being managed with one interface here. So it's going to show me a graph of how much I'm using, and write speed, growth, dedupe ratio. We get a pretty good dedupe ratio. Down at the bottom, it's going to show you any alerts that may be happening. And just to go over the environment, so this PhD Virtual Backup, we can handle 3 different hypervisors with this one product. So currently I have my Citrix lab being protected. I have my VMware lab being protected with the backup, and I also have a DR VBA over on our DR site for replication. But you can manage multiple environments here. If I had a Hyper-V environment, I can add that in here and be able to protect all 3 hypervisors with this one product in this one interface. So you can have multiple sites, you can have multiple vCenters at multiple sites, or some of the smaller instances where people aren't using vCenter. Maybe they have 2 or 3 hosts. You can just protect an environment like that with just one interface here. And you just add a new environment and you connect into that VBA that you've deployed in the other environment, connect it in here, and you'll be able to protect that environment once you connect everything in here. And it's just a matter of coming over to protect, and this is going to list all of my different environments here. So my Citrix lab, I see my different hosts, and I see my servers here. Same with my VMware environment. I see all of my different VMs in this environment as well. So it's very easy to manage all of my environments with just this one simple interface. And easy, once you back up, it's easy to recover. You can do full VM recovery. You can do file level recovery, where we're pulling files out of the virtual backups. We do instant VM recovery, where it spins up the VMs from the backup storage. You don't have to wait for it to restore, it just automatically or instantly spins it up. And reporting, easily attainable here, running all of these different backup reports. So with the virtual backup, it's going to give you, like I said, a good dedupe ratio, and this is the source side type deduplication. Now, this is protecting a virtual environment. So we're making connections, API calls into the hypervisors. We're taking snaps of the VMs, attaching those disks from the snaps to the VBAs and backing up directly. Now, if we have a mixture of this physical and virtual, what we can do is use our Unitrends Enterprise Backup. So just select the other tab. It's a web-based interface connecting into our virtual backup appliance. Both of them are virtual template files that you deploy into your environment. And what we can do, I can just show you the differences here. With my VMware UEB, I can protect hosts, virtual environments, and physical environments. So if we look here, this is a physical. These are agents that get installed on a physical machine, and I can manage the backups in here. I can also make connections into hypervisors. So I can connect to Hyper-V, and I can back up at the VM level here. I can connect to VMware as well, and it's just making calls into the hypervisors, not installing agents on each one of the virtual machines. And the instance I talked about earlier was I can back up at the virtual level, the full machine, but I can also get more granular. So, for instance, if I take this, I'm backing this up at the virtual machine level because it is a virtual machine, but this shows that I have an agent installed on it. So I can actually back up at the Exchange database level. So I can do application-aware backups with the agent, back up at the specific database level, and restore at the specific database level back into my environment. And the same with SQL. So I have an agent running on here on my virtual SQL Server, and I can see my databases and do backups and restores at the database level. So that is an instance where you can utilize both an agentless and an agent type backup on the same machine. Now, with the backups, we are backing up to direct attached storage. We can back up to NFS or CIF shares, and it's generally disk-based backups. Very efficient, very fast, and good deduplication. Now, with our Reliable DR product, when I move over to this is what is going to give us our compliance for RTO and RPO if you have your SLAs established. And you can get with our products good backups and good history, good retention with your files and your VMs. But with our Reliable DR product, what this is going to give you is DR assurance. So we can replicate machines to another site, create replicas, and we can automatically spin these VMs up in a sandbox and run tests on them to make sure that the VMs boot properly, but also we can run application level tests from within inside the guest OS of the VMs as they boot up. And we can test for different applications. We can test for different Windows or Linux services to make sure they're running. We have a lot of out-of-the-box tests for Active Directory, DNS, SQL, Exchange. We can run SQL queries against databases to make sure that the databases actually mount properly. So what you're seeing here is the compliance report dashboard. And this is reporting on these tests. So if we look in the center here, this is the compliance reporting. So let me resize this a little bit so we can see everything. Now, under the job column, this lists our jobs. So these are replication jobs, and a job typically is an application, which could be made up of multiple virtual machines with dependencies. So what we can do is we can replicate, spin up these VMs in the proper boot order if necessary. We can also re-IP the virtual machines. And we test them to make sure they boot, plus all of the application level tests that I described. And if everything is successful, we create what we call a certified recovery point. And this is basically a guaranteed recovery point in time to where your applications were spun up, tested, and everything was successful. So this is what you're seeing here. These are my jobs, and these are the results of the tests. So I can put my values for RTO and RPO in the test and test against them. So I know there's a lot of numbers to see here, but if I describe what we're looking at here, my application RTO column, this is what I put in the test, and I need to boot these within 30 minutes. This is my RTO. My application RPO, I have them all set for 1 day. This one's 2 days. So I just need to be able to have an RPO of 1 or 2 days. Now what we can generate, which is unique to Reliable DR, is RT actuals. Because we know how long this is going to take, because we do this automatically in the background, run all of these tests. So my RT actual here, for this one is 20 minutes, 7 minutes, 2 minutes, and so on. So I know exactly how long it'll take to fail over this application. And the same with my CRPs. I know that if I look at this report, that if I need to fail this over, this one's 14 hours old, this is 5 hours old, this is an hour old, and this is all relative to the frequency of my testing and my replication. And this is one of the reports Robert was mentioning that will get emailed to you automatically. And this is what one looks like. So the logo can be customized to the logo of your company, or in the case of an MSP, the separate clients. And this basically shows you the results of your testing, what you saw behind this screen. You can look at this at a glance and see, all right, here are my applications. I'm falling out of compliance with this one for some reason. My data is over a day old. so I can investigate to see what's going on with that. But I look at this and I can say, oh, well, I'm within my compliance because these are the values that I've set. I've tested against them, and everything is successful. Now, with the product, I mean, there are a lot of different settings here. I'm not going to go through every single setting, but with our different jobs that we set up, we can take a look at one, my Exchange SharePoint job. I can establish a boot order here, so I can make sure that my servers boot up properly, so the dependent servers boot up first. And with our testing, we have a lot of different options here. This is our recovery points, how many recovery points we can keep. But the main thing is our application tests that we're going to run automatically in the background. We have a lot of out-of-the-box tests. Currently, I'm checking just to make sure the information store is up, but these are the out-of-the-box tests. And nobody else can do this. We do have a place for custom scripts if you already have those, but these are the out-of-the-box tests for Active Directory, DNS, Exchange, quite a few for Exchange, and SQL. We can run queries against SQL databases, make sure they're available. But the point is, we're not just failing over machines and just seeing if they boot. We're failing them over, spinning them up, running all of these application level tests, and giving you a report on those tests. So you can look at all of your jobs, and if you ever need to do a failover, for whatever reason, you can right-click and just choose failover. And if there are multiple VMs in this job, it would boot these up in the proper boot order. It would re-IP them automatically if you needed it to. You could run all of the tests if you wanted to on a failover, make sure everything is running properly, and then everything is going to be running up in your DR site, and you know that it's going to work properly because it's been done over and over and over again in the background. And the advantage is you're not spending man hours or weekends to do this. You set it up initially. It's very simple to set up, and you just let it go. You schedule it to run as often as you need to. So once a day, once a week, once an hour, or more frequently. I mean, there's no limit on the scheduling. The limit is your infrastructure and your bandwidth. We can integrate with storage arrays here. If you're using existing SAN-based replication, we can tie into that. If you don't have storage replication in place, we have built-in replication with Reliable DR, which replicates at the virtual machine level. And we've also integrated this with the PhD virtual backup. So the replication that I described earlier, that's replicating from the backup data. It's creating replicas over at the DR site, and Reliable DR validates those replicas. So you don't have to manually spin them up when you need them to test them. Reliable DR will do that automatically. So the advantages are with the automatic reporting and getting these in the mail.
Cool. Thanks, Craig. That was I think a great look at the three product offerings that we have here at PhD Virtual and Unitrends. We didn't look at the Recovery Series appliance, which is the hardware component, but that's obviously available from our combined companies as well. I want to jump into the Q&A. Looks like first question, will this webinar be available on demand? Absolutely. Everybody's going to get a follow-up email with a link to access this on demand, as well as it will be posted to the PhD Virtual and Unitrends sites within about a week. Everyone is available to, or encouraged, if they like, to go to phdvirtual.com and you can download a free trial of any one of these products that you just saw. Now let's take a look at a little bit about, or let's take a look at a couple more questions. What kind of support does PhD have for ESXi free? So on the PhD side with the virtual appliance, it would be none because it doesn't support any agentless backup methodologies. But again, if you were to run Unitrends Enterprise Backup where you can deploy agents, we would have full support for the ESXi free. While restoring a virtual machine with the PhD Virtual Appliance, does the speed of restoration increase if we set up higher resources for the PhD Virtual Appliance?
That's a good question. So obviously, yes, to a point, because the virtual backup appliance is doing the work of reading the backup data and turning that into a virtual machine. So it is going to use memory and CPU resources. So typically it comes with 2 CPUs, 2 gigs of RAM, but you can increase that if you need to.
Thanks. Is the software on your local computer?
No, it is deployed as a virtual appliance into VMware, Citrix, or Hyper-V in the case of PhD Virtual Backup. It's an actual Linux-based operating system as a template file that gets deployed into those hypervisors. UEB is deployed into either Hyper-V or VMware as a virtual appliance. So there's no software running on your local desktops.
Cool. Can you clarify the differences in VM backups between PhD and UEB? Again, really the basic difference boils down to if you have the mixed environment. So if you do have the mixed environment where physical and tape is present, you're going to want to look to get the UEB product because it's going to be more efficient for you to manage all of that from a single pane of glass interface, and that's what the UEB product provides. But if you have a highly virtualized environment, that's really the main or the only requirement, then you're going to want to look towards PhD Virtual for that single pane of glass interface between all 3 of the major hypervisors. Let's see. Can I use my own storage device or disks?
Yes, so typically we write to direct attached storage or out to NFS or a SIP share. So if you're presenting your own storage to your hosts, we can utilize that. And if you're presenting out shares on your network, we can back up to that as well.
This is an interesting one. Not sure if it was discussed, but wondering what your recommendations would be on locations for a DR site. I've heard everything from 5 to 500 miles, and was wondering what you thought. That's a great question.
Well, it is, location, location, location. So
just like retail.
Exactly. So if the example I like to use, if you're on the East Coast and maybe you're down towards the south, where you get hit by frequent hurricanes, 5 miles is probably not a good choice. So you would want to be more inland. If 5 miles is enough for you just to get your data off-site, and that's all you're worried about. You're not worried about some sort of natural disaster. You're just worried about more of a local disaster, like a building burning down, and 5 miles is fine.
Cool. Thanks, Greg. So we're coming up here on the end. I do want to announce the winner of our $50 Amazon gift card. Ryan, did you ping me over the name of the winner?
Yep, I wanted to make it legit, so I waited to the very end, but you should have just received it.
Great. Okay, so the lucky gentleman is Guy Maroka. Let me pronounce that again. Guy Maroka. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. But Guy, we will be emailing you that $50 gift card, so enjoy it and buy yourself or someone special something nice. That's going to wrap it up. I know we definitely did not get a chance to cover all the questions. I apologize for that. There was a lot of amazing questions. If you do want to keep the conversation going, we'd love to do so. Obviously, this is a Spiceworks webinar, and PhD, as well as Unitrends, has a pretty active presence in Spiceworks. But if you'd like to come to our team page or tag us in a post with some of these questions, we'll get some dialogue going, both with us and also with the main community and users. You can also feel free to tweet us questions at PhD Virtual, and we'll get some dialogue going that way. Hopefully everyone found the content informative. Again, we tried to give just an overview of things to be aware of and mindful in the data protection and recovery arena as it relates to virtualization. Hopefully you found the software demos informative. You can download free trials of them. on phdvirtual.com. They're fully functional, free trials. I want to thank Greg for his time. I want to thank everyone for his time. And Ryan, thank you again for your time.
Hey, no problem. It was fun. I think that was a great webinar. And again, as Robert mentioned, there's a variety of ways to get in touch with him. And also, these questions will populate in the follow-up report for Robert and his team. So they should have the chance to follow up even if they didn't get to do that live today. And just a final reminder that you will be getting a link to the recording in about a week. So that'll be on demand. You can check it out as many times as you want. Special thanks to all the attendees as well as Robert and Greg. So that's going to do it, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and congrats, Guy.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care.